Hi, I'm Tammy White. I'm the founder of the Bobby White Foundation. Welcome to Hope in the Light of Suicide. I'm here with my co-host.
Good morning. I'm Bonnie Snyder.
So, last week we had a little bit of technical difficulty and was a little short on time, so we really rushed the end of the show.
We did. We did.
But we're going to get caught up on some things. Again, we want to thank WeBeam TV for allowing us to bring this show to you. And if you want to help support us, please go to our Kindest landing page, and you have the opportunity to donate at various levels. Whatever you feel comfortable at is greatly appreciated, so we can continue to bring some of this information to you and help those of you that are going through the grieving process, whether it be suicide or any other types of grief. Grief is grief.
Grief is grief. We also have our awesome T-shirts.
Yes, which I have mine on today.
And so, yeah, you can purchase those through the foundation.
And you can go to the website and you can either pick them up locally if you're local, or they'll ship them to you. There's two styles. There's the V-neck, the women's style, which I like. I got on, and then the men's. And we do have some at the foundation office too, although I picked them up last Friday and a good portion of them are gone.
Oh wow!
Yeah,
well, that's good news.
Yeah, no,
That's
it's really great. Actually, I'm delivering a whole bunch of them today, so that's yeah, I'm excited about that. I think it's starting off really well.
Oh, it is. I mean, I have a joke going with my my younger brother is a baseball player, and he plays around the country, and so everywhere he plays, he has a T-shirt, and my joke with him is, "Where's my T-shirt?"
Mm-hmm.
And so he, whenever he goes to a tournament or something, he will give me a T-shirt from that particular tournament. And so for me, it's like everybody likes T-shirts. Everybody uses T-shirts. To me, that's the most comfortable thing I have in my wardrobe, or the thousands. Of course I'm exaggerating. But the hundreds of T-shirts that I have, in my home, it's like you can't have enough T-shirts.
Oh no!
And this one is really cool because it supports the foundation and it supports the show.
Yeah, it supports the foundation, and we actually did this first design to honor and help support our Purple Folder program, which is the first program the foundation started, the first grant funding that we received for the foundation. So that's an extra exciting thing about it. And we will have more designs coming up, because when we were looking for the design for the show, there were like 4 designs that were like totally even across the board that everybody really liked. We went with the one that works best for TV, which I love our logo anyways, but there's a couple others that are really cool. So as we grow and get more funding, then we'll have more designs available for people. And probably by next winter, I don't know if you like them, I love in the wintertime long sleeve T-shirts.
Yes.
So we're going to have long sleeve T-shirts available by next winter too.
And wintertime in Florida means anything below 70 degrees.
Right, exactly.
So, once it goes below 70, we're freezing.
Yeah, we're cold.
Just saying.
Oh, geez. But it's true.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
And long sleeve T-shirts in Florida in the wintertime is great.
Yes, they are.
you know. But anyways, so like we said, we started reviewing this book, Progressing Through Grief, by the author Stephanie Jose, and we almost got through chapter 2 last week, and so we're going to finish that up. And chapter 2 is being open to grief. So we're going to finish that one up and then head into chapter 3, which is a relatively short chapter, coping through self-care, which is really important because this month is Mental Health Awareness Month.
It is. May is when I think of, May, along with being Mental Health Awareness Month, it's also Military Appreciation Month. And when we look at this theme of, suicide loss, I think it's important to acknowledge, how many of our veterans are lost, to suicide. Very personal to me as a veteran, as well as, to, look at that community. Not that, any particular groups of individuals has the market or corner on, suicide loss. However, at the same time, I think as we look at, different, the different populations, why does suicide affect this population? Like, what's going on that veterans
Right.
are, dying by suicide? What's going on that, teenagers are dying by suicide? What's going on with, again, people who are suffering from illnesses, that, they are dying by suicide, the elderly. But I did find it interesting that Mental Health Awareness Month and Military Appreciation Month are celebrated
the
in the same month.
month.
Yes.
Well, and that's, you're right. My first husband was a Vietnam veteran, and I know the struggles that he went through, which is crazy because these men and women like you serve our country and oftentimes fall through the cracks, and they're not taken care of the way that they really should be taken care of.
And, and there's so many issues that affect, folks in the military. I mean, we have, if you look at PTSD, and there's usually, I don't know, say that's, like the top one. Everyone, I think of veterans, equate PTSD to veterans, and whether it is, because they have been in a combat type of situation, or one of those high stress kind of, the majority of my military career was spent working in a prison, so you can imagine what goes on in a max security prison. Mind you, it's not, what I tell people is like, Shawshank Redemption and those shows, it's like, it's not quite like that. However, there have been situations that happened inside, behind the walls that, for some of us was very traumatic. Then you also add on to things that happen to veterans, military sexual trauma. People usually when they hear that, they only think of female veterans, but it's like, no, we've got some men that have, been on the receiving end, of sexual trauma as well. You don't hear about it as much, I believe, because of that whole, macho, image that we put. Men can't be violated like that because they're men. They're supposed to be able to, protect themselves. And it's like, no, of course, then an issue of, well, were they victimized, and sexuality gets brought into it, where it's like it has nothing to do with sexuality. It's all about power and control. And so when you're dealing with whether it's PTSD or the results of, MST, or just, the many stressors that, we go through, while serving, it can be, overwhelming, to the point to where, unfortunately, some veterans feel that's my way out is to take my life. And there is a need to, address, what is, sometimes I wish we had a magic pill. I don't want to, I almost said magic bullet, but I was like, I don't want a magic bullet.
No, yeah.
It's like, wrong kind of, it's like, I don't want to equate it to a bullet. But I wish, we had a magic wand, to wave over, the populace and say, hey, if we can remove this, then we would not have anyone else dying by suicide.
It would be nice. Yeah, my first husband was a Vietnam veteran, and of course, what happened to him was before I met him. But he had stepped on a landmine. He had also been in combat, did and saw horrific things, and it was just probably a couple of years before we met. He was doing new cable and new construction, and he had jumped from like the second story to the first story and dislodged a piece of shrapnel in his ankle, and ended up causing a huge infection. And at the time, he was also a hairdresser, and he would go to the hospital, and when they found out he was a veteran and a hairdresser, they kept trying to say that the infection in his ankle wasn't from being in Vietnam. And even the Veterans Hospital in Miami, they were basically trying to say, saying that because he was gay, which he wasn't, because he was a hairdresser. But both of his legs had a lot of shrapnel from stepping on a landmine. And it took the governor at that time, who I think was Lawton Childs. They wrote an article in the Fort Lauderdale News Sun-Sentinel about him. It took the governor to get him in to the Veterans Hospital.
Oh, wow.
And this was probably late 70s when that happened. And then when he was killed in 1986 by a careless driver, he was surveying on US 27. When I went to the sheriff's office to pick up his belongings, which was in an envelope, and of course he had his military ID in there, a couple of friends drove me in this it was a really cold room, and the sheriff came in, and he basically threw the manila envelope at me on the table. He just tossed it on the table. And I was like, I was beside myself. I just couldn't, I'm like, why are you doing it? My husband, he fought for this country. He came home, and he died by a careless driver in our own country. And this is how you give me back his belongings? It was disturbing.
That's a real interesting segue into the section of the book that we're on about society's view of grief. Because what I find sometimes where and I want to say there was a quote that was in the book that basically said how sometimes people have good intentions when they are trying to help us through our grief or be supportive. However, their actions and words might be misplaced. And when I think of, in your case, oh, by the way, here's your husband's stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it just slid right across the table.
And I just wonder, was that normal protocol? If there was any thought put into, well, this is not just only an envelope that contains, someone's personal effects. I'm giving these personal effects to the person who is suffering a loss. I likewise think of, when the when the deputy, had informed me of that Patrick was gone, and the way he said it, the way he said it, we found your son, he's deceased. And, again, my brain is processing. It's like it was wild because I could see the pain in their faces. It's like, how do we tell this woman this? It's like there is no easy way, to say this. And like I said, I have to give, the deputy and, his supervisor, I give them mad respect. It's my children's verbiage, mad respect. I give them, my utmost respect, and, a shout out again to use, children's vernacular, but, because we're not going to leave you alone. I'm not going to leave you alone until someone from Victim Advocate gets here. And explaining to me why the supervisor knew and not him, not, the guy who had just spent the last 30, 40 minutes with me on the phone, tracking it down. Um, you know, but going into society's view, it's we look at how we deal with grief through a totally different lens. When we are on the supportive side, giving support to someone who suffered a loss, that lens tends to shift when we're on the receiving end of the support. And I, have on the show a couple of times, drew the comparison between, when Aiden left, and I even have a hard time saying that word because of D, after we lost Aiden, and, supporting, Carl and Kira through, his loss, and, seeing those, cliche-est things, he would want us to be happy. He would, he's in, I don't know if I ever said he's in a better place, he would want us to be happy. We've got to get through this. To doing that shift, when we lost Patrick, and now Kira became my biggest support. And I remember telling her everything that I said to you 6 months ago. I know this is a repeat, mind you. Everything I said to you 6 months ago, some of it was the stupidest stuff that ever came out of my mouth. At the same time, my brain is processing from a, I'm a loss survivor. I'm supporting someone who's a loss survivor, and I'm a mental health professional. And sometimes those three do not connect. There's a disconnect between those three sometimes. There shouldn't be, but there is at times.
Well, I could see where that could be true. Yeah. It's like the incident with my first husband was very cold.
Mm.
And when Bobby died, I don't know, it was the victim's advocate or one of the sheriff's people, they took his wedding ring and his necklace, and they called me off to the side. And and I remember the woman just taking my hand and very gently putting his jewelry in my hand.
Mm.
Such a night and day difference.
Yes. Well, I think too, listening to Carl talk about, the events when we lost Aiden, and, him telling the detective, or stating to the detective, I want to see my son. And, the detective, I don't know if that's possible. And, Carl saying, I don't think you understood. That wasn't a question.
Right.
But I applaud the medical examiner for, and I'm going to presume it was, a breaking with protocol, in which, I forget. I think he said it was a she. It was a woman. Where she allowed him to see, Aiden before they took him from the house. But from what I understand, she took time to explain to Carl, before I let you see him, let me prep you for what you're going to see. Mm-hmm. You're not going to, it is not your son that you're looking at. These are the, the physiological changes that, take place when someone dies, in the manner that, that Aiden died. And then allowing him, that moment. Because I wonder, I don't know if we've never had the conversation. There is a part of me that wonders if they would have not let him see Aiden before they took him away. One side of me says, I probably would have been, as I'm on my way to Kansas, also bailing my son out of jail. Well, I mean,
Yeah,
and,
no.
I mean, I say that jokingly.
Right.
I could see him getting, highly agitated over, how do you tell me I can't see my child? Like, and I could put myself in Carl's position, because I remember after, when I called the coroner here, I don't know, I have a favorable, not favorable impression in terms of how that went down, because it was we finished the autopsy, tell us where you want the body. Wait a minute. So I just 2 minutes ago had a sheriff's deputy tell me that my son is gone. I'm calling you because you have my son's body. And no, I'm sorry for your loss. That we've done the autopsy. And I'm like, it's not been 12 hours. How the heck did you do an autopsy that quickly? Why were you even allowed to do an autopsy without notifying an next of kin? Was it that, like, what was so crucial or important that you had to do the autopsy right then and there?
No, actually, I think that with the type of death.
No, and that's what he explained, because
Yeah.
I finally did ask
Yeah,
the question.
because Bobby's autopsy was done in less than 24 hours.
Tammy, there's a difference, though, between Bobby's death and Patrick's.
I understand
You were
that.
there. You were,
I understand that, but what I'm saying is that it's the type of death.
No,
Those two
like I said,
types
I
of
get
death.
that.
Yeah.
I guess for me, what I'm saying is, I'm not arguing, the type of death necessitated an autopsy. You could have waited until next of kin was notified before you did it. I also understand, but at the same time, I understand Florida law says, hey,
Right,
we
yeah,
can do
that's-
it without notifying next of
Right.
kin. I just,
No, I understand the feelings that you're coming from, being a mother, and
it adds to the
It's-
grief.
yeah.
At least, prep me, like, and I'm not saying just me, specifically, you know, prep a next of kin, whoever that next of kin is. Okay, your loved one is gone. We're going to have to do an autopsy. Because the other side of it is, what if we had religious beliefs
Right.
that would have clashed with your need for an
With-
autopsy?
Right.
I mean, that's the point that I'm getting at. And we're,
Yeah.
I think that's a debate we can have, back and forth.
Well, and that's very legitimate, because things like that do happen. Things like that do happen. But yeah, it's
And in this, and in this section about, societal's viewpoint of grief, it does state that, we have generations of people who do not know how to face, handle, or talk about grief, or tend to be uncomfortable with outward expressions of grieving. And so, when we have these, discussions about, again, the legalities say we got to do an autopsy. Okay. When you look at everything that transpires between, that time of death to the service and then beyond, everything that impacts that becomes a part of that experience, I think has an impact on grief. It either intensifies it, or it, for lack of a better word, softens it a little bit. I could say, having the particular victim advocate that I had, she was absolutely amazing. She really helped me through like that initial 24 hours afterwards. When I think of the therapy team, that worked with me, during my grief, during the grief process. I mean, I ended up in rather intensive therapy, to deal with the loss. And I'm very thankful to, I call her Nikki, I met her, Dr. Gravel. She was like, no, just call me Nikki. Okay, so if it wasn't for Nikki and, Brianna, my, the nurse, the psychiatric nurse, the, medication nurse, I guess, call it, or I was dealing with, do you want meds or not? And let's try meds for a while. Having people like that, I think, softened the blow a little bit.
Well, and she talks about in here, how that may have over the years made the grief process harder for humans, is because years ago, and even children were involved, they didn't hide it. You weren't hidden from the person dying.
Right.
You were, you used to have the viewings in the homes.
People died at home.
Yeah.
Yes.
They died at home. They had the viewings at home. It wasn't something that was hidden from anybody. The children. I remember when I was a teenager, my great-grandmother passed away, and I wanted to go to the funeral, and my mom didn't want me to go, and I had to talk and talk and talk to let her go, to be able to go to that funeral. And we're kind of hidden from dealing with that, and not growing up, not learning how to deal with death and dying and grief and going through that process, more so now than how it used to be.
Oh yeah, I remember as a child, I understood death, but it was on a very superficial level, like, insects die. Spider crawls across the floor.
You smash it.
Yeah, crawling spider is dead spider. Just saying. So I understood things like, insects dying. I understood things, like your dog or your cat, your pet, a pet dying. For a while, my brain never processed that people die. And, I remember, there were a couple of deaths that happened, again, I was, as I was younger, that you're right, was very shielded from it. It wasn't until, it was an individual, his name was John Lee, who was like a brother to us, he's, not my parents' biological son, but, he was like a brother. And, he unfortunately was murdered. And I remember, like, being in the hallway, like, near the kitchen, and I'm listening to, my parents talk about, his death. And I just remember this flood of, like, dread come over me. And that was, like, the first time that I actually processed that people, that people have, there's an end of life, there's death for people. And we were, I was allowed to go to his funeral. For the longest time, however, I could not talk to my parents. I didn't know how to talk to my parents. And I was probably 10, 11. Yes, I was still, Devin's age.
That's really
Devin's
young.
age.
But again,
I didn't know how to talk to my
Right.
parents, so I would have to sleep with my bedroom light on. And I want to say eventually I was able to have the conversation with my mom, and I, told her, I said, that I was afraid that, I didn't understand that, like, one, why did he have to die? However, the knowledge that people die and what happens afterwards.
yeah, we have too many years of being shielded, like you said, from the process, and I think that makes it harder in society, today.
And I think, exposing children to, death and dying, I think it should be handled on appropriate levels.
Oh, most definitely.
I walked, and again, we've shared this throughout, the what are we on, 22 now? This is our 22nd.
27, yeah, 22.
Oh, I mean, so, and I know you've talked about this throughout, this run that we're on. I asked myself, how involved did I want to allow Devin to be in, planning his dad's service? So I would ask him. I did not take him to the funeral home with me to plan the service.
Yeah,
He did
no.
not go with me for the first, when I was able to see him, the first time after he was gone. The funeral, the week of the funeral, definitely. But prior to that, it was, tell me what you want. What do you want to see happen? In allowing him to be involved in, the decision making in terms of, what, was Daddy's final arrangements going to be. And I just remember, I want Daddy buried until cremation meant we could bring Daddy home. Okay, no. Then I want Daddy cremated. And, he comes, when he walks in the house, he looks up, hi, Dad. And sometimes I'll ask him, did you say hi to your dad today? And he's like, yeah. And then there are other times where, and I find myself, I don't want to push him to say, make sure you say hi to your father. It's, I don't see him ever forgetting his dad.
Oh, no.
And at the same time, I don't want, I want him to be able to process through the loss in his way.
Well, and when we do that, we feel like we have more control of our feelings.
Yes.
And we need to have that because, and especially when you have everything that's going on outside you. And if you let too much of that negativity, something in, then you're going to fall into depression. You're thinking that you're not living up to society's standards
Yes.
of how you should be dealing with your grief. And there's no such thing. You deal with your grief the way you deal with your grief. There is no right or wrong way. And if you feel like you're having trouble, if you get stuck, please read. There's many resources that you can reach out to. There's grief counselors, there's psychiatrists, there's life coaches,
Organizations.
Organizations, peer-to-peer support groups. You can reach out to your local hospice.
Your faith-based community.
Faith-based community, most definitely, yeah. So you don't have to hide it. You don't have to go it alone, and you don't have to live up to what others may think or even what you may think society standards of how you should deal with it is. It's totally individual, and that's that's how that goes kind of handling others while you're going through your grief. Your job while grieving is not thinking about how to make everyone else more comfortable with your feelings.
Right.
That's what she says in here. And it's not. It's, they're your feelings, and you're welcome to your own feelings.
I don't know about you, but I remember when a friend, as also, a coworker, lost someone close to them. And I, for, months, I kept hearing, about this loss. And I just remember, I feel guilty about it now. Because I remember, there were times where it's like, I don't want to hear this person's name anymore. Like they're gone, get over it, kind of thing. And, again, this is where that, two sides of your brain, kicks in. It's like, okay, look, move on. But then I, fast forward, I remember having a family member, tell me or say to me, you have 2 other children. I'm talking the children I gave birth to, not my adopted children, mind you. I mean, I throw my adopted children in here. However, you have other children who still need you. I would post something on social media like, constantly, every day was something about, my son. And, this family member who, I adore, mind you, stop, just stop. And I'm like, I can't. They lost a child as well.
Mm-hmm.
And, I remember thinking, I wish, I would like to be able to have processed and, for lack of a better way to put it, gotten over losing a child as easily as you seem to have been, that you have done. But I'm not you. I can't do it like you, like you said.
Right.
Let me grieve in my own way. And I, have, again, friends and, other family members who, are still, every day you see something on social media posting about, their lost loved one. One of my friends from school did a post and, tagged all of us, last Sunday,
Mm-hmm.
bereaved Mother's Day. And I was like, I don't think I ever knew that day existed until, of course, recently, like, wow. There's
I
a
didn't
day,
know it existed until the last couple of years
there's a
either.
day that
Mm-hmm.
is set aside specifically for moms who have lost children. And
Right.
it's that Sunday before Mother's Day.
Well, and her first griever's rights is I have the right to grieve in my own way and at my own pace.
Yes. Yeah.
And nobody has the right to tell you any different. Nobody has that right. So, yeah, and she has she has an extended list of what she calls the griever's rights.
I like the one where she says, I have the right to trust myself, my thoughts, and my feelings. And because they are my feelings, they are my thoughts. This is my process. And where, as we go through this, our process might look very similar to someone else's process. I can do even if I could sit down with somebody and do a match for match. So this is how you felt today? Hey, I felt the same way. This is how you felt at 2 o'clock? You know what? I felt that same exact way. It is still uniquely personal to each one of us.
Oh, it is. I've mentioned before the extremely different ways that myself and my in-laws, my husband's siblings, his two sisters and brother, even just between the three of them, those three siblings, all have gone through this process completely differently
Mm-hmm.
and different from me. And there's still similarities because, of course, they're siblings and they lost the same brother, but their process of dealing with it, all three, is different.
I mean, I could, piggyback on that with, Jeannie and Carl, Patrick's
Mm-hmm.
brother and sister, my oldest and, my daughter who's my middle, where, um, Carl is not only processing losing his little brother, at the same time he's processing losing his son.
Mm-hmm.
Her Jeannie is not only processing losing her younger brother, her nephew. And, where they're both processing, we're all processing the same, loss. It is, oh, wait a minute, a son on top of, Carl's process through losing Aiden, his son. It's different than Jeannie processing losing Aiden, it was her nephew. Even though, we're very close, close family. At the same time, I look at how, the entire family. If I look at, Carl and his children, Jeannie and her children, how everybody is processing losing, the both of them. It hits each one of them different. Or Carl's oldest child, Jess. Aiden, of course, her little brother, Patrick, was like they were like this close, and which looks very different than say one of her siblings. I'm going to use her sister Mackenzie, for example. Okay, Aiden's her brother. They were close. Her relationship with her uncle was not that close. It's still my uncle, and I miss I grieve his loss. We had a different relationship than what
Right.
those two did. So yeah, it's even among family members, it looks different.
Well, and that kind of goes into everybody grieves differently,
Mhm.
but that's part of your self-care. Your self-care is going to be different than the way somebody else takes care of themselves through this process. There's 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 no book that tells you how you have to do it. Um, there's no references. You have to do what's best for you. Um,
And if that includes, one of the rights that she has in here, I have the right to sever relationships with those who are not supportive or who make me feel inadequate or inferior. And, when I read that one, I'm like,
that was a huge one for me.
yes, because I think about, friends who I think superficially appeared to be supportive. However, when I really sat back and examined, are you really supportive of my life? It wasn't. There like the support wasn't there, and I was like, oh, I get it. I get it. It's one thing to say, I'm sorry for your loss. How can I help you, or what can I do to get you through this, and mean it. Like if you're going to say it, if you're going to say it, be sincere. Don't. I heard that you suffered this loss. What did you watch on TV last night? What? 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 Or, I heard you suffered a loss. Hey, you want to go to lunch? No, okay. If it's like, to me, there's a difference if do you want to go to lunch? Because, it's important that, you eat and everything like that. But, more of the, you suffered a loss. And, hey, what'd you watch on TV last night?
Well, I had an experience, and supposedly this person was one of my husband's best friends.
Mm-hmm.
And when Bobby died, it was all about him and how Bobby did this to him. Mm-hmm. And I just recently found out that he was telling lies about his interactions and why he moved down here. And another friend who they all grew up together had to straighten this other person out as to what the truth was. And this person was not a healthy person for my husband in his life. His friends knew that. Nobody shared it with me. I thought I was the only one that felt that way. But again, when Bobby passed away, it was all about him, and Bobby did this to him. Why did he do this to me? Mm-hmm. He was supposed to meet us at the cremation place, and he got there when we were pretty much finishing up, and I had to completely sever ties with him. He came over to my house screaming and yelling at me one day when I had my broken leg. Mm-hmm. And I'm just like, are you hearing yourself? What would Bobby think about this? And I haven't seen or talked to him since. And the unfortunate part is he has children who I really adore, and I don't see them either.
And I think what I find too, when you're making this decision to sever ties with individuals, um, you know, these particular actions are happening. Like this person is doing, whatever it is that they're doing that, causes you to call into question whether or not you should sever ties or not. And a part of me, before I made like that final decision it's hard for me to sever ties with anybody because, not that I'm a glutton for punishment, my brain tends to process what are they going through. And so, when I hear people, I look at this one, I have to, a friend, albeit a very superficial, it's a superficial friendship. It's a friendship, but again, very superficial. But when I think of this individual, a lot of times is, if I'm going through something, if I look at, say losing Patrick, I know this person would say something inappropriate. However, the inappropriateness made sense on one level because I viewed it as they're trying to take my mind off of what's going on. And, so it's like, okay, so on that level, the quote unquote friendship made sense. However, when I look at, if that is your only purpose, not that, and I hate, that this may sound like, we're using people, or that, oh, it's a friendship that's being used, which is why I said it's a superficial friendship. At some point it's like, is this, yeah, it's serving a purpose, but is it healthy? And when it gets to the point to where it's not healthy, like I find myself, telling myself and other people, are you making excuses or justifying the behavior that you're experiencing while they're going through the loss too? Okay. So, you take that into consideration. Is this their way of grieving? Which, she has this, one of the Bill of Rights in here where she says, I have the right to change my mind and then change my mind again.
I like that one too.
And I thought about that one, and I was like, severing people, but then changing my mind again, and like I find myself asking, did I, was I, and again, quote unquote, justified in severing this tie? Maybe not, let me change my mind. No, yes, I was very justified in severing that tie. Let me change my mind back, and I see that flip-flop.
Well, and part of it too is, don't feel guilty about taking care of yourself.
Right.
Because if you're in the company of somebody like that, such as our person, it's toxic. And for me, I was going through a hard enough time.
Mm-hmm.
I'm the one who found my husband. I'm the one who lived with him for the last 30 years. Mm-hmm. And it's all about you and what he did to you. Mm-hmm. And then going and bad-mouthing my husband to other people, lying to other people. I'm sorry. I have to take care of myself and my family.
I agree. I totally agree, Tammy, in that when you look at...
And at the time when this decision was made, like I said, I had broken my leg severely. And so my sister-in-laws had to come over, and, once a day, and my neighbor would come over once a day to help, take care of things. And then I got that thrown on top of me, and it's like, I can't do this. My health and my mental health is the most important thing right now, not making sure you're okay.
Which I think is, a key point that, she was making here in the book. How do you handle others through this process? And, again, I find where, and we'll get into this next chapter, coping through self-care, next week. Well, no, I think we're right
yeah.
on we're right on
No,
track
we're
with
good.
it.
We're going good.
You know, but that is a, I don't want to say, let me call it a balancing act between how do I handle my own grief while handling what someone else might be going through and how they're handling the grief. You know, when I think of, say, for instance, you know, this particular friend, when, you know, I told him, you know, my son is gone, you know, the first response I got was it the son that I met? And I was like, yes, yeah. So, and again, they didn't really know each other. Like, I guess if they saw each other, like, oh, that's, you know, that's who each other is. There was no like relationship with my son other than, you know, there's a friendship with me, and they knew I had a son. You know, but at the same time, you know, it is, all right, I need to make sure that, you know, I am taking care of myself, you know, mentally and emotionally, so that I'm not going off the deep end. Because, you know, at the same time, doing this balancing act between, you know, processing, well, how, you know, it's like, oh my gosh, you know, my oldest son who, you know, now, you know, his son and his brother, you know, not minimizing, well, my grandson and my son, you know, my daughter, you know, her, you know, nephew and her brother, you know, not minimizing that, you know, that tight circle of friends that I have who, you know, had a, you know, a tight relation, you know, we call ourselves the tribe. Patrick was part of that tribe. You know, now also, you know, processing with them their grief over losing, you know, a member of our, you know, that tight little, you know, that tight friendship group that we have. And so, you know, I find sometimes that we get into this, and like I said, she talks about it in the next chapter, how sometimes we find ourselves intent on taking care of everybody else that we forget to take care of self. And in taking care of everybody else, sometimes whether it is severing a relationship because one side of our brain is saying that it's toxic, that other side of our brain is like, cut them some slack, they're grieving too. You know, and it's what point do you make that determination that, no, this is not healthy,
Right.
this is toxic, and I have to step away from my own well-being.
Most definitely, and that was unfortunately our situation, um, and I wasn't the only one in our family who's stepped back from that person either. It was just something that had to be done for our own self-care, for our own preservation, and for, you know, the legacy of my husband. You know, it's not what this person, his perception per se. It's his, but that's it's not the truth. So
Yeah, I mean, I see us next week, you know, diving into this, the chapter of, you know, coping through self-care. You know, like I said, as I look through the chapters of this book, I like the way she lays out, like each chapter is a nice segue into the next.
It's a good building block, and she has sections in here for you to write in as you're going through the process too, and a big section for journaling, which and that's, you know, a big part of self-care for a lot of people is journaling, meditation, journaling, you know, praying, you know, whatever's gonna
Exercise.
yeah.
I know that's a dirty word for some people.
Well, like I said last week, exercise and yard work, those are I can mix those two together. But again, the time flies, but we'll be here next week, and we'll continue. If you want to go through this book with us, you can get it on Amazon. If you go to smile.amazon.com, and choose the Bobby White Foundation as your charity of choice, then a small donation will come to the foundation. And don't forget, our T-shirts are available. That's another way you can support the foundation and show people your nice T-shirts with the foundation. The foundation logo is actually on the back of the T-shirts. So, yeah, it's I'm excited about that.
Absolutely. And as we look into, this being the first show of May, which is Mental Health Awareness Month, it's important that, we do recognize that people, you do suffer through things, and understand that there are organizations that, are at your disposal, to reach out to deal, with what's going on. We think of, the flagship that started this off, the Purple Folder.
Yep, we have those available. You can contact the foundation. If we need to mail them out somewhere, we can do that for you. We'd be more than happy to, just so that we can let others know that there is support, and you're not alone. And that's kind of what we're here for too, is to help, through that. So
We always thank you for your continued support, and as we sign off, there's always hope.
there's always hope. Please remember.